Thank you. I would like my POIs verbally, please, if possible. And I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Honorable panel, fellow debaters, welcome to this side of the House. As the Prime Minister, I will make a variety of points which show why this motion must stand. I will start off by defining the key terms in this motion before proceeding to create a counterfactual. Once this is complete, I will establish my framing and delve into my substantive arguments before finally coming to a conclusion. So without further ado, let us start by defining the motion. So the first term I'd like to define is academic journal. An academic journal are their publications where the latest research by scientists, researchers, and academics in the general area are published. And I'd like to also define peer review, and I'll define this as peer review is when the research is sent to other experts and researchers in the same field to undergo review and receive comments and criticism, and the work can only be published once the peer review is complete. Now, I'd like to create a counterfactual showing the difference between the two worlds. So what is the world with peer review? Well, it's extremely slow. If peer review is mandatory, first you have to write the academic journal, and that itself takes so much time, putting all your knowledge on paper. Then you send it to the people who have to review it. Then those people who have to review it have to find the time to read it. Once they read it, they have to properly review it, check each line, check everything about it. And most of the time, everything is good. And then so they go over each little bit and correct it. Then they send it back to the original author once it's corrected. And the original author goes over it again to make sure everything still works and the peer editor hasn't messed it up. And if something has gone wrong or the author doesn't understand why the peer review did something, he sends it back. So you get the idea. It's an extremely tedious process. But what happens without these reviews? Well, it's so much faster. The authors can publish the academic journal at a much faster rate, and they won't have to go through this tedious process that I've outlined above. And I'll explain how this is this can be so game-changing, because people can get this information at a much faster rate. There are just so many positives about being able to publish it without these peer reviews. Furthermore, if the people are unsure about whether whether the information is good or bad, they can always request for a peer review. All we're saying that we regret that it's mandatory. Now let me move on to my framing. My framing is that the peer review is a tedious process, and the time saved could be used effectively and even to save lives. We can also tell how credible a paper is by knowing who wrote the paper. Lastly, we're not banning peer review, we're just making it optional. So let me get to my first substantive. Instead of using the time to peer review, the time since it's released earlier, the extra time could be used well. Your Honor,
Right, sir.
I'd like to show this with an example. Yes?
Would you rather have 100 articles in the span of a month literally justifying why vaccines cause autism, or one article over the span of 3 months that tell you why vaccines don't?
Yes, so you're getting to the point of credibility. I won't answer this now, as I'll come back to it in my second substantive point. So first of all, Your Honor, we are going through a pandemic right now. Supply chains are impacted and trade cannot go on that well. Travel is restricted and borders are closed. But what is the worst thing that is happening, Your Honor? People are dying. Citizens of this world are helpless against this new virus, and it is infecting so many people. Furthermore, as it is a pandemic and it is contagious, it is affecting so many people throughout the world, and it is impacting them in so many negative ways. Arguably, the best solution to this problem is to create vaccines, but you cannot create vaccines without information. However, as each paper that is created is going through peer review, it is taking so much longer to get this information out to doctors. Furthermore, as this paper is going through this process of getting reviewed, the people are dying, and that's just not right when the paper is already nearly perfect, maybe with a spelling mistake here or there. It could save lives. But without peer reviews, these leading health experts could quickly create these vaccines. No, this would allow doctors to use the newfound information to save people and develop medicine that would immediately help without having to wait for all these different articles to be released. Therefore, it is vital to understand that peer reviews are severely slowing down the process, and it's making it extremely difficult for people to get the work out in public. Now I'd like to move on to my second substantive point, which is credibility. Here I will show how we can know how a paper could be credible based on who wrote it, And this should also answer the question raised by whoever asked the POI. So I'm sure that our opponents will argue that we don't know how the information is credible. How do we know that things are actually going to help? Well, we can look by looking at the status and the background of the author. We can already get a clear idea of how credible a paper is. If the paper is written by a professor of Harvard University or MIT or Stanford, or just a leading expert, and most research papers are written by these leading experts, then you already know that the paper is a lot more credible than a paper written by a high school student going to school. No. Furthermore, as I already stated before, if the authors are unsure about their work, they can always ask for a review. We're not banning reviews. All we are arguing is that they should not be mandatory. And we're giving all these reasons, Your Honor, but why they should not be mandatory, not why they should be banned. Yes, if they are banned, then authors could feel insecure, and that's not good. But if they're just optional, then the people who are in the highest caliber, the leading experts of this world, can publish their work at a much faster rate to help others, while the people in a bit of a lower caliber who need that extra precaution and who need the peer editors to give them that extra credibility can ask for that. So therefore, and lastly, if the authors submit bad work, then they lose their credibility. So people would know based on previous work how credible and trustworthy the author is. So the peer review system can be used to help authors, but it should not be mandatory. Now I'd like to end with a quick personal story. So we have a personal family friend. He loves writing, and he has so many great ideas that I believe could truly change the world for the better. These ideas would help the world and make it a much better place. He had a variety of ideas that could help with the pandemic. However, each time he wants to publish one of his journals, he has to go through the same tedious process of waiting for approval and peer editing. Furthermore, once this peer review is complete, and this takes a long time, mind you, he goes over everything once more to make sure that everything still works and it has not been changed too much. So, but without the system, he would have been able to publish his articles much better, and it could definitely have helped the world. So therefore, Your Honor, this motion must definitely stand, and we do truly regret this system of mandatory peer reviews. Thank you, and I'm proud to.
Here. Thank you very much to the Prime Minister for that speech. To begin with the case from the opposition bench, I would like to welcome the leader of opposition. Here.
Great. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Give me a second. Panel, before I begin with my speech, my principle, my practicals, let's just notice that there's this House regrets motion. That to say, it's mainly retrospective, so we're just debating more on like not a policy, but what happened in the past. We're more than happy to defend the peer review system in the past and why it has resulted in a bunch and a plethora of benefits. But also, I'd like to point out that they've made an enormous concession when they say that, hey, this is something that's fine in the future, that we're just going to have an optional, which is a very like soft line stance. A and B, it is not that historical. Let's just quickly clarify what peer review and academic journals actually look like, and I'll go to my principle and my other argument. Firstly, we think of peer review actually looks like maybe fact-checking, commons criticism. Maybe there could also be like quite a few groups. It can be from quite like few related fields, especially in today's society, where many fields such as like maybe philosophy and ethics, maybe like law and ethics, many fields could be incredibly intertwined. Let's say like biotechnology and maybe like fintech and stuff like that. But also, we think that academic journals, they are on like a very large spectrum, which I think both all teams in the debate will probably agree are extremely important. Let's say things on development and policy. Let's say things on COVID vaccinations. They're obviously things of high societal importance. Let's just talk about the principle and why we went on this principle alone. Firstly, we think that the principle of truth is extremely important. That's to say, we'd first like to know that the peer review system is something that's highly established and something that, like, at least in the past, we don't think that there were anything that's very comparable in the past. Because like literally, like the best way to do so is to have other very researching, other very prominent people go over your article. But secondly, we don't think that OG is often a counter model at all. But that's to say, we think that simply because this in the past is something that's so important, and we think that this upholds the principle of truth. That's to say, we already try to minimize errors in a host of other areas of today's society. That's say like with like journalism, we also have lots of like fact-checking mechanism for say presidential debates, such as, especially because we think it's a very large responsibility for these academic journals, especially because they're so important. We think such as like how social media and how like celebrities should be held accountable. They're like with great power comes great responsibility, as cliche as it might seem. That's why we think there should be adequate checks and balances, at least on a principle basis, for peer review system to work in the past for academic journals and also in the future. But also, we would like to say that for the public and for our people, we think that there's a right to know what's happening. Even if we consider in the worst case that not everybody's going to read all the academic journals, we see that many of them could be like crystallized into like explainer videos to like actually know what this academic journal entails. But secondly, we do think that just as we don't restrict the right of the majority to know about like what's happening around the world, what's happening in like the horrors of war, we think it's perfectly legitimate for people to know about this, to have the most accurate and the most like the best information ever. That's why we think there are so many like media channels trying to like sell their own version of the story to have the best accurate depiction of truth. I'll talk about practicals, and this is where many of my rebuttals are so heavily integrated against PM's speech, because I don't think many of their points really stand. Firstly, let's just talk about why a peer review is more likely to be quite like, firstly, it quite inclusive different views, and secondly, quite effective. Firstly, we think that quite efficient in the short term and the long term. Firstly, we think that you can actually like say talk about different like methodologies and how that's really important. That's to say, even if PM comes up like PM comes up and tells us that, hey, maybe like, oh, there are different methodologies, it's very ineffective. We do think that firstly there are like many different journals and academics maybe in these related fields. So like obviously we think that many of those like methodologies are going to be quite similar anyway. I think that's a large mitigation for them in the first place. But secondly, we do think that even in the worst case that they don't really care that much, we still think that this peer review system actually allows cross-pollination, as I'll talk about later. So maybe you can like build upon a certain source to like build upon to like basically make a very large like argument, scientific argument, or things like that. But we think that ultimately, because like these views are more likely to be inclusive, we do think that because like firstly, it's highly likely to be more established, because I told you before that like, it's probably like the best system like that operated in the past, and probably the best system that we still have going forward. But secondly, because there are clear mechanisms, like I think I didn't really Google it, but like if you Google it, you can really see how peer review works and say like different institutions, and how like because of the incentive to actually create articles faster, we think that there's firstly a large incentive for them to do so, and secondly, especially because on a capacity level, many of these university researchers are highly likely to be like resistant to stress, or highly likely to be very renowned at the very top of the field. We think it's something that there are both incentives and capacities to streamline the system. So even if it didn't work that well in the past, we think that it already was improving in the past, so we're perfectly healthy to defend that. But you also think that there's a very large incentive to be clear as possible. This is extremely important, because like without this, I'll talk about the counterfactual later. DL is going to talk about this too, but they can easily like scrutinize like maybe how like what types of methodology you're going to use, maybe like what types of quotation you use. So we think that there's also a large incentive for people, let's say you're using humanities or social sciences, to use like Chicago formatting, or to basically like use it as fast as possible to like streamline those incentives for you to know what's happening in the status quo. So why like that's also directly I'm also going to talk about like why correction is extremely important, and basically counteract lots of what the PM says. Firstly, correction is extremely important because like, it could be quite confusing as to how you come to this conclusion, especially for like say social sciences that you don't really know like how this premise actually goes to the conclusion. Secondly, for definitions, right? Even for things like that are more hardcore, say for like science, we think that the very reason why Vox had released like this entire video explaining why efficacy rates basically mean different things for like different vaccinations, different like vaccines, means that the definition itself could be like quite hard. So that's why we think that it's more likely you're more likely to, as a researcher, to clarify that much more clear in academic journals, rather than just to stick to your own like worldview, like just presuming that everyone knows like efficacy means, when people are just likely going to compare the ratio. So that's why we think that correction is extremely important to have like more clarification. We think that counterfactual, they presented this firstly like they just need credibility. This is extremely abhorrent, right? Like look, if you say you're undergrad students trying to like write a paper who are like not a very prestigious university, I think that you're not going to get like all that attention when you go to like as compared to somebody who's like in your field for a long time in like Harvard or any of that. You basically entrench these stereotypes and entrench this hierarchy, where I don't think like just as ad hominem is something that we don't like. We think that we should judge people on the merit of the work, not the merit of like what they've done before. But we also think that counterfactual here is that they're more likely to maybe like maybe firstly send it to like friends, secondly send it to professors. I don't think this is that like that better, because firstly, like many of their comments might not be that substantive, but secondly, you don't really get the cross-pollination from a bunch of different like universities, bunch of different institutions, especially because we think that much of this research could be quite like expensive. You can have like equipment, personnel, and this and all of that. So that's why I think it's better off when you have the different people working together in a team. What are the true impacts of this? And DL is going to talk about this a lot. Let's say firstly for like COVID vaccines, ultimately we're happy to trade off the quality for quality, even if you have like a better like vaccine in the future. You can like firstly have better like rules upon regulations and operations. Secondly, you can like better logistics to like store the Pfizer vaccine at like -70 degrees Celsius, rather than a world where maybe you're like, hey, it's okay to be -50 degrees Celsius and then you harm like an entire city. On a number scale, we also win. But also, my DPM is going to talk about like other like less conventional things, like maybe like nuclear stations, which are like maybe like politics and government, especially because like scrutiny is that important when you have things that are high risk, high reward, like nuclear stations and like other things, or maybe like say geoengineering, which is becoming more and more necessary in today's society. Ultimately, because we think that's principally justified and practically probably the most effective method that we have today and going on to the future. Proud to close.
Here. Thank you very much to the leader of opposition for that speech. To continue the case from OG, I would like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
So before I start my speech, I would like all POIs to be raised verbally. I will not always be looking at the Zoom chat or the Zoom screen, so I may not see if you raise a placard or you write it in the chat. So with that being said, I would like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. In my speech, I will start off by rebutting some of the previous arguments made in this debate, followed by my own framing and my own mechanism to prove why we, as opening government, clearly win this debate. So first of all, what are some of the arguments that we found? And actually, it was quite hard to distinguish the arguments because in the speech that we just heard, the arguments sort of flowed together and we didn't see clear big ideas come out of them. So it was actually quite hard to discern and debunk all of the smaller arguments, but I will try my best with it. So they argued that there will be more fact checking and there will be these research will be more truthful if we have these different types of peer reviews. Well, my question to that is how? Your Honor, bear in mind that these reviewers aren't the ones who did the research. Why do you do research? Because you try to find out something that we don't know yet to advance us in any sort of field. So really, the idea that, for instance, medical scientists will be fact-checked by other scientists who didn't do the research is an incorrect assumption, since these people made the research. So really, peer reviewers often can't fact-check because the research shows is what fact-checks. They can only point out smaller mistakes, which really is there's no need for that, since those are already eliminated. Now, another point that they mentioned was that the system has improved in the past, and in the past it was worse, the peer review system, now it's better. Yes, but it still didn't improve enough, and also they failed to explain how it improved, so it was quite hard for us to follow that point as well. But it is still not a good, solid system yet. We shouldn't try to fix a broken system. This system just requires us to fuel money into it, fuel time and energy into it, and at the end we get a research paper that is almost identical to the previous one. So I will touch on that more in my own point. Lastly, another point that they made is that you can get more attention if you get peer review, since you can be published in higher quality journals and it will be based on merit. Again, this is just an assumption that they argued that, oh, if you're in an Ivy League, then only then can you publish into these high quality research academic journals. However, if there is no peer reviewing, you would be able to choose which journal you would like to publish in, which journal fits your research the best. So really, this was again an assumption stating that, you can only publish with people who are in the same study system as you or the same university level. That doesn't make sense. Again, that was also an assumption. So overall, the case that we just heard, it was full of assumptions, it was unclear, and therefore we quite frankly believe that they should not win the debate. Now, on to my own framing. Peer reviewing academic journals is a very unnecessary step for academic. Yes?
Sure, especially because like you're more likely, let's say, because COVID vaccines are all the rage, are you more likely to be paired up against like people who have developed the same vaccine and therefore have like far better chances of like figuring out loopholes that you otherwise won't have to?
Well, the point of research is, of course, to find answers to these types of questions. So with COVID, my partner already touched on this. With COVID, unfortunately, it is a virus that we all know is impacting our lives. It's impacting our lives right now. We are in Zoom. So really, the point with any research related to COVID is speed. The idea that we need to get this research out. So if we're talking about vaccines and which vaccines should be good for which people, then those should be streamlined immediately to the people to ensure that they make the correct decision. However, with peer reviewing, that can take months until research about the different vaccines may come out. And by that time, the elderly people have already probably vaccinated themselves with a vaccine that is now proven to be less effective. So with anything like that, my partner's case is the strongest since it proves the idea of speed. So back to my framing. Peer reviewing academic journals is a very unnecessary step for academic journals, research papers to undergo, since they are useless and just a waste of money. Believe it or not, journals are a form of business. They make money off of the research. So naturally, costs need to be minimized with the effectiveness and the volume of the research should be made as high as possible with the least amount of cost. So our side of the house will prove why we save more money for these journals and why
Point of information.
More research will get published. If we do so, then we clearly need to win this debate, since there will be more of an economic incentive for these to happen and for research to be published, and therefore we will have more research, and therefore we can solve more of our global issues, which is in essence the idea that we want to convey. Now, onto my own model. What about the status quo where we have peer reviewing? What happens? Well, a professional in their respective field of the researcher, a professional in a respective field creates a research paper. They research it for months and then they try to get it published. To get it published, they send it to someone who has the same rank, the same education as them, and to critique it, who have not done the research. So this is what is going on currently, and I will point out the flaws with this. Well, first of all, these people ending the research are professionals. Someone who takes time to research an important issue for a long time means that they spend a lot of time on it and they review it a lot. Why? Why do they review it a lot? Why do we, as researchers, ensure that the research that we publish is the best quality and nobody will be able to pick at it? Well, first of all, their personal image and trustability. That is the most important for researchers to keep up. And since researchers want to achieve change in society, that is why they do research. They want their research to be the most helpful. And in some journals, they can get paid for this. And so, of course, there's an economic incentive there as well. No, they want to have the best research possible. So why should academic journals or these researchers waste money on getting their research reviewed by someone who has the exact same skills as them? Is it true? It's just truly just a waste of money. It is not like a Wikipedia entry or a Yahoo Answers response. These are highly educated people who review their work all over again several times. They will not have spelling mistakes or sentence fragments, and they can't really be fact-checked because their research proves that. Another problem is that these people did not do the research who are fact-checking. I've already touched on this. These researchers spend months researching these different topics, and then they try to get it published, and then a reviewer goes there, reads it, who has nothing to do with the research, who probably never researched this topic before, and therefore they try to critique it, but how can they give constructive criticism on an exact narrow topic that they have not probably responded to? So yeah, all right. Also, all of these are problems not only because of time, but also because of money. It costs ridiculous amounts of money to get this research sent, so that then the research has to get reviewed. These people have to be paid, then they have to send it back, then it's a back and forth, then it gets published. So there's a lot of cost associated with this. And really, it's irrelevant because the message of these papers will not be changed. And so it is important. But in the counterfactual, in ours, we see that people will still have very high quality research because they want to keep up their credibility. So they won't publish anything that is bad. They're also highly educated writers who work on their own. So as a consequence, they will actually, if we regret this motion, then these people will be able to publish their research much more easily, which is high quality. And really, these peer review sessions will bring nothing. They will only cost a lot of money and waste a lot of time, which defeats the whole purpose. So clearly, Your Honor, we have to win this debate because we showed why the speed of research will increase on our side of the house and why the cost will also decrease, resulting in even more research being published, especially during these rough times when we need research in order to change our lives. Thank you.
Here. Thank you very much to the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. And to close off the opening half of the exchange, I want to welcome the Honorable Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Is this volume okay?
Yep, it's fine.
Thanks so much. Okay. I'm gonna start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think it's necessary to point out two major contradictions inside opening government's case. Okay. First of all, opening government inside the PM tells us that peer reviews are kind of fine because they kind of need them for, say, reviews written by people of lesser stature, for example, people who are not university professors. They say it's perfectly fine. Then in DPM they come out and says that peer review is something that's trash. They say it's something that's not useful. We think that besides this being a case shift, we think there's also inherent tension within their case. We don't think that it's strategic for them as well. The second contradiction that came out is that in DLO they tell us that other research is something that's not relevant, but then in response to our POI, they said that these people would be extremely relevant, so we kind of confused on what they're actually arguing about. We're going to do three things. First of all, a few pieces of refutation on PM and DPM. Second, an extension on, on bigger projects such as nuclear power, and finally a bit of weighting. Cool. So first of all, a bit of rebuttal towards PM and DPM. Cool. Okay, so first of all, they try to characterize to us in a counterfactual that this will kind of be slow. Look, if you have to write a research paper, then it's reasonable to assume that your writing process is going to be something that encapsulates all of that stuff that peer review actually gives you. We think that even on the worst case, we do not think that the magnitude of say speed is something that's that much anyways, right? They try to tell us about things such as COVID vaccines and all of that stuff. I think it's important to note that lab reports or say reports published from say pure statistics are not necessarily the same as academic papers published in academic journals. We think that proposition has to make that distinction. If they really want to argue on that, then they're not arguing on the correct motion. But the third thing they tell us, they didn't tell us is that they didn't tell us why speed is something that's necessity, and why that speed actually surpasses all of the quality, and why that speed actually surpasses all of the principled analysis that we gave you. Because in LO, we tell you that the people have the right to get the best information possible. We tell you there's an extreme stance, and we tell you there's an extreme possibility, especially in papers concerning things such as social science, that there's bound to be things such as bias, there's bound to be things that are hard to be analyzed. We think this is something that PM also doesn't tell us anyways. Cool. The third thing they tell us is that credibility can somehow be assured because, if that person is a Harvard professor, then therefore you can trust them. Look, I think it's a huge logical fallacy to say that you trust certain people over others, and therefore you put blind trust in the person who just graduated from Harvard or teaches people at Harvard. We think that this is something that violates our principle of, say, trust. It violates our principle of, say, truth. We think that this is something that's not principally justified as well. But the second thing here is that notice their concession inside the PM as well, right? Notice when they tell us that, say, weaker people might require to, say, request such peer reviews. We think this is already a concession, saying that peer reviews are something that's necessary and something that's mandatory in our status quo today. A few more miscellaneous rebuttals to what DPM told us today. Okay, first of all, they tell us a bit about credibility because people have the incentive to actually save face, all of that stuff. We already told you in LO that not everything is very clear cut. We tell you a lot of these things, especially those about uncharted territory, such as things about nuclear power, things such as dams, green technology. All of these things require extensive peer reviews because one person cannot exactly get everything right. We tell you that fact checking, we tell you that comments, criticisms, all of these things are going to be inherently important, not just for safety, but also for people to get a better understanding of such things. What he told you inside our LO, on say when Vox has to publish that video, it already means that certain people have skewed perceptions of what is considered A and what is considered B. We then accept, especially because this research paper actually now increases the clarity between different things. This is also something that must be compulsory. And we tell you that especially because lots of things of social sciences, all of these things also require certain things such as bias control. We think these things are also extremely necessary as well. Cool. Okay, so moving on to the counterfactual, what is this likely to look like? Right? Okay, just talk about things such as nuclear power and also things such as dams, all of that stuff. Let's first talk about what the counterfactual looks like on the side opposition. The most important thing here to know is about things such as clarity, things such as how you're going to be more validated, all of that stuff. Okay, more validated, all of that stuff, right? We think one of the more important things that research papers actually allow people to do is about things such as cross-pollination, where you use previous research papers and allow for other research to actually commence, right? This is important in terms of weighting, because in terms of magnitude, you still have to build on previous research papers in order to actually gain more information, which means that your base has to be something that's extremely concrete. It means that your base has to be something that's factual at its best. We think this is something that's extremely important. On side proposition, what's likely to happen is that certain loopholes will now be exploited, certain loopholes will now not be pointed out, and especially in constructing things such as nuclear power, especially when constructing huge infrastructure projects such as dams, such as green technology, we think these things are likely to be neglected, and we think that impacts of these are going to be obvious. You're more likely to compromise on safety, you're more likely to compromise on things such as efficiency, you're more likely to shoot yourself in the foot. But the second thing here is about probability, right? What is likely to be something that's going to be better on the outside of the house, right? We told you in terms of, say, practicals, that we say that, governments and policies, all of these things are likely to be highly streamlined and highly efficient. Notice that this clashes with what proposition tells us about things such as how it's likely to be slow, right? We provided you incentive analysis on, say, why people are more likely to actually streamline this process, especially because this process has already been cultivated, especially because this process has already been established throughout like different generations. We think that in terms of probability, probability of success, we think that on the terms of weighting, this is also something that we uniquely win on. But the final thing here, the final impact on our extension, say like bigger projects, is that we think that inherently safety and also like lives, all of these things inherently matter. If you're basing your argument, or if you're basing your research papers on things that are unchecked, or like if things that are uncriticized and things that are not peer reviewed anyways, we think it's inherently important that people now delve into this system of say, I think that what I'm doing is something that's correct, and people delve into a sense of false complacency. We think that this is also something that's extremely important because now it requires people to actually fact check their own self. We think this is something that's extremely bad for them because now they have to waste more resources, now they have to waste more time. We think on the counterfactual, what our side actually brings you is we ensure every step of the way is something that's truthful. We ensure every step of the way is something that's based on facts. When you have people who are actually criticizing your work, or when people are actually critiquing your work, although you may concede on a shorter term level that this might take some more time, or this might take some more layers of, say, certain layers of bureaucracy, we think what's likely to happen is that you're less likely to compromise on things like safety, you're less likely to compromise on things such as efficiency. What you're likely to get is more informed readers and better informed readers as a whole. You're less likely to actually your readers are less likely to actually believe into other sentiments. We think that what's likely to have is a more unified reader base. We think that that's something that's inherently good. Finally, in terms of, say, numbers, we think that especially because we benefit so many more people, especially when you gave you the point about cross-pollination, when you have to base certain pieces of research on other things, we think that people we're impacting is also something that's much larger. We've never been prouder to oppose.
Here. Thank you very much to the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech. To begin with the extensions from both closing houses, I want to first welcome the Member of Government. Here.
All right, give me a minute. Thank you. Both opening houses fail to interact with things like discrimination, with things like biases, with things like competitiveness that exists in the society of professors, researchers, and scientists. And we will be doing that today, right? So first thing we're going to tell you is that these researchers, scientists, and all, they are mostly made up of like white men. Like, for example, when you think of scientists and all, you think of Einstein, you think of Newton, you think of Schrodinger, right? You think of all these scientists. And because the reason for this is because most of this community itself is made of white males, right? And it's very likely for these people, I mean, it has already been shown throughout history where these people look down on people of color and people of women. Like, for example, in NASA, earlier in NASA, did not accept people of color and people and women because of their gender and because of their color, right? And even though like it was uplifted and things like that, this discrimination that exists within the society still exists in today's world, right? And please acknowledge that, right? And this is like the most important thing is to this debate, these people of color and these women. So because this discrimination happens, all right, and because this prejudice and this pre-existing notion exists that the scientists believe in, right? So what happens is these black people and these women, they feel like these people are unqualified, these people are bad doing research in general. I mean, like this is what the scientist feels, right? I mean, these other scientists feels, right? Just because of the color, just because of gender, discriminated, they are looked down upon, right? They reject the research and they reject their academic journals, even though probably they recognize some of this research is good, right? What will they do? What will they do? They won't care, right? Because they don't want these people to get credit. They don't want these people to get recognized in the first place, right? Because they basically don't like these people because of this discrimination that happens, right? They are oppressed, and it's really unfair for these people because of how much work and effort you put in, how much passion you put into your work. All those things are just taken down because of the discrimination that happens in society, right? And there's nothing you can do about it. There's nowhere you can go. Your research won't get through, right? And that's really bad. And so understand that also this research done by this research done by these people could have actually been useful, right? Because a lot of these people have been turned away, right? And you never know how useful these things could have been, right? It could have actually saved lives. Like maybe, for example, somewhere along the line, someone created like a cure for HIV, for example, but they were rejected because they were LGBT or they were a female or because of a black person, because of discrimination that happens in society, basically, right? So you don't know. Um, Basically, you don't allow a certain part of society to unleash what they have, to unleash their skill, to show their potential, right? And you basically never let this part of society gain access to and show show what they want, right? I mean, to show their research to the public, right? This looks like curable disease being uncured at day, right? Like I told you, like you limit the potential of people, you deprive them the opportunity, right? And what happens is, in the future, less and less people of these discriminated parts of society are going to be in this field, right? So you basically not only limit the people you have today, but you also limit the people in the future who might contribute to this society, and basically your side doesn't let that happen. You don't utilize the skill of these people, right? You don't use it, right? And then let's talk about biasness that happens in today's world, right? So biases can be categorized into two things. So prestige. Let's talk about prestigious universities like Oxford or Harvard. And when you see like the professors, the renowned professors, things like that, and basically because they are professional and because you look up to them and things like that, you are likely to buy into their research just because they are famous. And like it's unfair if you give this bias to a certain group of people, and it's unfair for the rest, basically. And we don't want an unfair world, right? We want a fair world, right? And also another thing unis can do is to bribe these people with money, and because they have the power of money, they have the power of funding, and it's easy to bribe these peer review committee members and to just pass the review committee, right? And basically what we're telling you is that your policy or this policy that's in place doesn't really work. Okay, we also tell you that what happens is also competitiveness exists, right? So notice and understand, in a competitive research society, your goal as a scientist to be recognized, to be better than your colleagues, to be like the number one, the best researcher in the place, no matter what the means are, right? Peers are more likely than not to feel jealous or to feel inferior because like they see you have a good manuscript or your manuscript is better than others, right? So what happens is they are likely to sabotage, or they are likely to not let your research go, or to basically not let you get the credit you deserve, and to try and block your ways by any means necessary, right? And it is to this point that your research or the research of many individuals are unable to go through because of this, right? And even though the research might be good in the first place, and basically your side doesn't allow that to happen. All right. Okay, let's talk about how we're going to solve this. Okay, and before that, also notice that on our side, because no one checks your work, on our side, people are more incentivized to work harder to create like a perfect model, right? Because it's directly going to release to public. Any mistake you make, anything you do wrong, the blame will all fall on you. There's so much pressure, and that's why you will work harder, right? And yeah, with that being said, let's go on to like our alternative, which is basically like basically post-publication review, meaning you just straight away release things you release your paper, you release your research into the public, and basically good papers will get good reviews, bad papers will get bad reviews, and from the review you get, right, you are able to change what you need to change, and no one's going to stop you. No one says that you have to follow this review or something like that. You see the reviews yourself and decide whether or not this thing is true or not, and once you accept it, you can add into your research and such, right? So that only those kind of things happen only on our side, and you don't change that. So we prove to you how your side does so much more harm than good, and your side fails to counter discrimination and all these other things, and that's why side closing Gov takes the debate. Thank you.
Okay, here. Thank you very much to the member of government. For the extensions from CO, I want to welcome the honorable member of opposition. Okay, here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Give me a moment. I'll be setting my timer. Okay, cool. Now, I'll be starting my speech in three, in 3, 2, 1. Let's say that I want to drive to school. Which method guarantees my safety? One like a Fast and Furious driver participating in an F1 race, or one where I'm a normal, rational human that values my life? What is my problem with the member of government here? The argument is contingent on the fact that most scientists or whatever experts are white, because prejudice and bias exist whatsoever. But keep in mind that this is a very problematic argument, because keep in mind, journalists are very colorblind. Knowledge itself is very colorblind, and there are incentives for academia to be more inclusive when it comes to expert input, because it can further validate the credibility of these academic journals. But a bigger problem with the argument is that they immediately assume that the credibility of these papers would immediately be validated without the vetting system. I think it is weird the government keeps bringing up so many what-if scenarios with little to no reason as to the lack of such a system would be better. Just because there are pressure means nothing. People are dumb, people are gullible, people are irrational, and these papers that are passed without the vetting system are only justifying the ideas of these dumb, gullible, and irrational people. But okay, what is my argument here? My argument is that academic journals are fundamental mediums of knowledge where information relating to certain academic disciplines are transparent and used to be built upon by other individuals. Keep in mind that these sources of knowledge are oftentimes seen as legitimate because academic journals are seen as credible sources of information and research, meaning that people will look into these academic journals and the information that it have are seen as true and utilize that knowledge in some ways, shape, or form from whatever discipline, ranging from physics to the humanities, and to build upon that knowledge and the information. But why is knowledge important here? Simple, because acknowledge that academic journals are seen as legitimate sources of knowledge, simply because under the peer review system, it eliminates forms of biases or incorrect information in this journal, incentivizes experts to ensure the only correct information are published then. Simple. These experts do have credentials and they do have certain expectations that go along with the reputation that also affects the career as well. We also say that academic journals are very much influential in validating opinions and ideas. The problem without the peer system are that academic journals that are published can be used to justify things like eugenics, or at worst, even worst case, scientific racism, or just bad ideologies in overall that validates and justify harmful actions towards minority or systemic discrimination. Because of this peer review system, there is a filter towards the ethics of such paper, and it is because there is a filter that we allow for academic journals to not go beyond a certain ethical threshold, since the review system is rigorous and includes experts that have differing opinion to scrutinize this paper. We also allow for better improvement of this paper, because when you are criticized, you are exposed to the flaws that you have within your paper and use those criticisms not only to sharpen your own sense of knowledge regarding that, but also to improve upon the quality of work that are provided. What is the alternative here? No peer review system. What is published and is instantly legitimized by the public. But why is that bad? It opens up the ground for incorrect and potentially dangerous information to be legitimized at the papers equating vaccines to autism or actual eugenics. B, it feels rhetoric they utilize this information. People like actual fascists or very traditionalist conservative are going to use it to justify their action towards religious, racial, or even gender minorities. And C, since academic journals are seen as credible, it's going to influence a lot more people to believe in this dangerous information. But what if another scenario plays out here? Let's say that people won't believe in this information, okay? Then here comes another problem. Academic journals, once the most legitimate form of information, are going to be devalued as a result. And as a result, we said that legitimate sources of information are going to be much more decentralized, making it even harder for people to access this information, especially when there's already skepticism over the credibility of this information. On our side, we said that we'd be willing to trade off it being faster or cheaper if it means that upon the quality of the work that are provided. OG themselves consider to the fact that peer review systems work and allow for credible articles to be published. Under our side, we don't care whether or not it's going to take a month. Here, even if it means that these information are going to be correct. OG's assumption, the professors or whatever have the credentials are automatically immune when it comes to this paper is detrimental because it makes credibility reliant whether on the and B for no correction of information that are wrong or downright downright harmful information that can severely damage the value of academic journals or influence people to believe on this information. The DPM they came out and said that this is a broken system, but a broken system is better than no system at all, especially when people look up to these journals as legitimate information. It is all the DPM says is unnecessary when every academic journal to this date are vetted by experts. It is problematic for DPM to bring about economics, but here is the problem with that. It is contingent on the assumption that credibility of these papers are already credible. It is unacceptable for DPM to immediately assume that these papers are credible without a vetting system. No, thank you. But as well that, we also say that it incentivizes publishers to ensure that the contributions that they can make are credible and valuable to the community overall. Because keep in mind that these experts are the best of the best. Let's talk about the value of knowledge here. Keep in mind that knowledge is important and it's fundamental to the development of certain disciplines, and that centralization of knowledge under academic journal allows for better accessibility for people to use and also allow people to know the truth. Under no system, what do we say? We say that it is susceptible to disinformation and the risk of such disinformation being legitimized and used in a way that can threaten the well-being and welfare of certain demographics. Papers equating vaccines causing autism are a direct threat to the health and lives of children, and we said that these papers are complicit in the death of these children. Yes.
Do you realize that our side of the house does not take away the ability for these academic journals to delete any research that they deem to be not good? So
yes.
really, if they're
we do not, yes. Yeah. Yes, we do know that, but keep in mind, just because it's optional, it means that the system in and of itself is already good. Just because you make it optional doesn't mean that the peer review system is bad. Your entire argument is based on that fact, okay? And yeah, okay. And I'm talking about like how papers promoting eugenics allow for systemic discrimination of all sorts of minority. This is unethical, and we said that academic journal has a moral responsibility to influence people to believe in correct information and to use that knowledge in a productive way, rather than a way where you could put actual innocent lives at stake. Said government, please tell me, how do you actually deter that? This is not fun and games. These are actual lives, actual research, and it's unacceptable for them to justify literal death or any harm whatsoever that are caused by this paper. Errors, underspelling errors alone, ladies and gentlemen, errors are incorrect information are used on an incorrect premise that could potentially be harmful when the citations are right by you, figure you, and or simply because the Shapiro own 5G Shapiro said so. There are no way to ensure that citations of these are free from these biases. Of course, highlighted the emotion and gave a process analysis to the outcomes that are provided here. And this is why I am very proud to propose for this motion, ladies and gentlemen.
Here. Thank you very much to the member of opposition for that speech. And to sum up both cases for both sides of the House, I want to first welcome the government whip. Here.
May I please be excused to the washroom a moment?
Oh, yeah, sure. No worries.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
All right, I'll start anytime now. If you want to ask me any POIs, please interrupt me. The problem with Science CEO is that they do not acknowledge the discrimination that happens in these scientific fields and all these academic fields, right? The problem with them is that they don't understand that Albert Einstein needed to take years and years to get his information published through this system of people of white males who didn't want to accept his books because he was a German, who didn't want to accept his papers because he was a German, before it got published and before it became famous in the first place, right? We tell you that discrimination happens on all levels, all across these types of fields, because these fields are normally controlled by white males, right? They came and told you that these fields, they came and told you that these fields, this knowledge is colorblind, right? And that people, and that knowledge is colorblind, and people don't go by color, and they go by knowledge. We tell you this is really, really false, right? The scientific and the academic fields are very, very controlled by males, and are very, very dominated by males and by white males in the industry themselves, right? A lot of people of color who do not get recognition at all for their scientific discoveries and so on. Can you name one black scientist at all? Even females in this current industry do not get recognized at all, because when they want to submit their papers into the peer review system, and the peer review system takes a look at his papers, the majority of his peers are white people, are males in this kind of society. The reason because of this, these journals and these manuscripts do not get accepted, because they know this is a person of color, and they already regard their ideas as low in the first place. And when they regard their ideas as low, is why the papers do not get accepted in the first place. No, if anything, I'll take you later at the end. But then he told you, right, that then he told you about how misinformation will happen, and misinformation will come up because of our alternative. We tell you that misinformation only happens because of the fact that you publicize these type of info, which is why we do not do that in the first place, right? What we do instead is, when we publish these types of manuscripts, when we publish these types of manuscripts without any system, we gain, number one, OG's benefit of how they say it will be faster in the first place, and number two, we also say that it will be judged by the public themselves. The little amount of public which is interested in this certain knowledge in the first place, because we tell you that these smart people are able to judge themselves whether whether these papers and these manuscripts are good or not, whether they give the correct information or not in the first place. Other scientists in the field are going to be able to judge this in the first place and see whether it's correct or not, see whether this information is correct or not. What about the dumb people that they try to propose, right? We tell you that these people are not interested at all in these academic fields whatsoever, because they've never taken a chance to look at these fields in the first place, right? But let me go back, let me try to let me go and deal with OO's case a moment, right? Because OO told you that these renowned people are very smart, and they need to check this and also to make sure the information is correct. And they also told you that they need to clarify definitions and so on. We tell you that, and they also told you that there's different people on the team to discuss a certain idea. We tell you that this idea of different people and so on is not something, right? Because all the majority of peers and everything are white males with similar ideas and similar goals and everything, right? We tell you, because of this, any irregular idea from another person in society that comes in, their ideas are not accepted. What are you doing, right? You are literally limiting a whole part of society from their ideas, from their ideas being accepted into the scientific academic community. You're taking out their whole substantive, you're taking out their whole ideas as a whole, right? And this may be the one thing that can help society as a whole, right? But what else did we tell you that wasn't contested, right? We also told you about universities and how contention will happen in the universities, right? Because number one, only prestigious universities will be accepted, and when you look at prestigious universities, you say, oh, these are the kinds of papers that will be accepted in the first place. Anyone?
Sure. So do you think it's actually better? Like, which side is better? When you have a side which actually has like rigorous checks and balances, or when you have like these entire medical journals that are like published that like really you can't retract in the long term?
We tell you that it's okay for these medical journals, even if they are wrong, to be publicized, because they won't get any awareness in the first place. Only those good journals which are publicized will get awareness and are known by the community. On our side, at least with our alternative, we have people of color who can submit their journals submit their manuscripts and so on from outside, and you can get representation of people of color, and you can get representation of people of women and so on in the society, right? That is the difference, right? And prestigious universities, let's talk about that. On your side, prestigious universities, universities are going to be, manuscripts are going to be picked based on the universities they come from, whether they're prestigious, whether they give you enough money to take these papers in. And because of that, it's enough incentive, right? We tell you that because of this, more prestigious universities, the gang of universities like Oxford and Cambridge are going to be the ones whose papers get accepted. That means other universities who are upcoming and want to and have actual smart people in it are unable to get any recognition whatsoever on your side, right? We tell you that on our side, as go form, these other unrecognizable universities can submit their papers and can show the level of smartness in the first place, right? We tell you that because of this, they can get accepted in some ways, right? But why is our alternative work, right? Because we told you, number one, that it buys OG's argument, and we win over OG because OG told you about how they wanted to work on their time, right? On the time being processed. We tell you that we post with a post review we can number one, the public gets to check and balance on these papers in the first place, and we tell you that no time will be wasted, right? That's how we win their arguments. I think OO and CO blends into one part. So I'm going to take them down right away, right? Because they simply told you that these reviews and so on are like a filter for all of these to get all the good ideas in and the bad ideas out, right? We tell you that because of this, the good ideas are the ideas by white male people, right? And by people who are rich, by people who are white and male, people who are viewed as holy by society, and those which are taken out are people of color and people women and so on, right? But even if that's not the case, we tell you that it's really bad because of the fact that they only take manuscripts which come from certain universities and so on, right? We tell you that because of this, their arguments do not stand, right? And that's why we win this debate.
Here. Thank you very much to the Gulf for that speech. And to close off the semifinal as a whole, I would like to welcome the opposition to wit. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep.
All right. Okay. Okay. Oops. All right. Sorry, the lighting is a bit messed up because of the windows, but okay. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Peer reviews on side opposition's world is as accurate as their entire case. Why is that? For several levels of analysis and reasons, aka my rebuttals, I'm going to present as to why side government's entire case should fall. And I said opposition side government, my bad. But so here are for a couple reasons. So this is for 6 reasons why side government's case should fall. Number one, like the opening half just stated on some facts about how speed is important and how there's a huge urgency as to why we need all these kinds of different information coming out. On our side, we believe that setting the time frame to a very narrow spectrum, like in the COVID season, is a really huge scorer of the motion. But let's say even on their case, we believe that it's reckless and arguably more people would die. Like they characterize peer reviews as like English teachers checking it for spelling mistakes and adding nothing to it. On our side, this is completely false. What are peer reviews? Peer reviews are scientists. They are professors reviewing your entire work to check whether it's factually correct, whether it logically makes sense. These are credible researchers who have spent years perfecting their craft. And let's say 1 or 2 errors were to happen on their side, even the best case scenario, 1 or 2 errors would happen on their side, that could potentially lead to more harm. Because by being factually incorrect, you could probably make some weird chemical of the COVID vaccine, give it to a bunch of people, and then the majority of people will die more. And understand that when you get criticized, you improve. And when you improve, you get better. And then when you get better, when your manuscript gets better, it has a lot more info with a lot more credibility. You need to say more people want to read it. So you end up saving more lives on our paradigm. Then opening half also talked about some weird argument about how doctors were filled down, and then they took this really soft stance of making this optional, which ended up being nothing more than a one-liner. Like, it's really weird. like doctors will feel down, which is then like the real incentive is why you should be a doctor in the first place, and even so, who really cares? Then they also talked about like on the topic of credibility. They said, oh, they're good enough. The doctors there, good enough. Like this is one person who apparently has the information of the entire multiverse. He's good enough, which is completely naive. Like there's a reason why we have council of professors. Because if one person is the big brain genius, can obviously make a mistake because all humans are flawed. The reason why researchers in the first place is because that mistake could literally lead to the death of millions of people, i.e. the COVID case that I brought up just now. And then DPM talked about some weird argument about, oh, you save more money. And then it went on for like 2 minutes, which was like a really weird argument for the entire debate, honestly. Then then another rebuttal. They also talked about how peer reviewers are not smart and they don't know anything about the topic compared to the doctor. Like these are peer reviewers who like I already brought up how they already have extensive research of this type of knowledge. To say that they are like dumb and don't know anything about topic compared to someone who's been researching for months is ridiculous. It's like saying your English teacher is incorrect for giving you a 10 out of 100 on your English essay because she didn't write it, which is completely false. Next, government whip also came out to you about racial biases and when they review on paper. Outside, my member already talked about academia and what's the main purpose of it. But even so, even on their best case scenario, let's say it does happen, it's much more worse on their side. Because on their side, only one person of like black. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, ma'am. Sorry.
You realize that it's not a good comparison to compare English teachers to researchers because English teachers know their subject, whereas researchers didn't research the specific subject that the reviewers didn't research the specific subject that they're reviewing?
Verbatim from your PM. Peer reviews are checking spelling mistakes. Go look it up. Next, on racial biases, we say that it's worse on their side because understand that there's only like one African American researcher getting his entire review being shut down. It's not his entire career. On our side, when these kinds of eugenics get passed through, you discriminate the entire African American race because now you give them an incentive and a justification to continue their racism. And then government whip also talked about, they asked a really silly question about how you cannot name a black scientist like Neil deGrasse Tyson never existed. Like, okay. So this debate has been really messy. The number one clash I could get from this entire debate is which side allows better credibility. On their side, on government side, like opening half just talked about how this is a waste of time and that they're already credible enough, which is without adding any like analysis to it. Like at least from closing, at least there was some like levels of analysis I could get, like how there's already some sort of biases and how, but too bad they never really expanded it on by giving more analysis as well as the impacts. But regardless, on opening opposition, they talked about how one person can get everything right and how more people will want to read your thesis when you have been given proper credibility. And we say, yeah, that's completely correct. But on our side, we brought something new to the table. We talked about scientific racism. We talked about the main stakeholders we want to take care of, which is the people who are affected by this scientific research. More often than not, understand that the victims of this scientific racism is obviously, people of minorities. It's not just racism, ableism, transphobia, homophobia, all those kinds of different like unjustifiable phobias that happen on their paradigm. On their paradigm, by not allowing this type of peer reviewers, you literally slide it through. Like even if we follow their soft stance by making it optional, no racist that when they create this sort of thesis or want their stuff to get reviewed, they just publish it out and then literally convince the entire world that black people are monsters or because they have some certain homo in their gene, which is obviously not true. And what is the justifiable outcome to this? As my first speaker already talked, they talked about how they already justify harmful rhetorics. For example, PragerU. Like, Ben, my wife has a wet-ass P-word Shapiro that ends up harming trans people. And unfortunately, WIP never engaged us on it because they only said about how people won't read harmful rhetorics like this. People won't read false information like this, which is completely wrong. I remember back in my youth, I used to watch videos like Ben Shapiro destroys trans feminist LGBTQ, fire emoji, fire emoji, fire emoji, which was shared upon by millions. And that's the kind of harmful rhetoric that happens on government side, when you do not fact check all these kinds of arguments. When you don't have diverse pools of people of different backgrounds who come together and give your proper take on it by preventing not only factual bias, but as well as unethical and unjustifiable racial bias that happens on the government's paradigm. So this is why closing opposition wins the debate. Here.
Here, thank you very much to all debaters in this room. I invite everyone to virtually cross-bar and shake hands. The judges will now proceed to deliberate and will announce the results when we're ready. Thank you very much.